meeting of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to begin with the usual items of protocol because we do have some participants joining us online this afternoon. A copy of today's proceedings will be recorded and uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel following the end of the meeting. To help with the smooth running of the meeting, if you are joining remotely, please keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. Remember to mute it again when you have finished speaking, and use the raise a hand function if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, and refrain from using the chat feature for chat amongst one another. For those attending in person, please remember to switch your microphone on and turn it back off again when you're finished speaking. Myself and the officers attending the meeting will monitor proceedings with a view to ensuring all requests to speak are seen. In terms of the officers attending this afternoon's meeting, it's quite an extensive list. So I'll run through these. We have Stephen Quinn, the Council's Chief Executive, Louise Pringle, Director of Business Operations and Partnerships, Margaret McCrossan, Head of Accountancy and the Council's Chief Financial Officer, Sharon Dick, Head of HR and Corporate Services, Leslie Bairden, Head of Finance and Resources at the HSCP, Kath McCormack, HR Manager, Barbara Clark, Chief Accountant, Michelle Blair, Chief Auditor, Anthony Jenkins, Resilience Officer, Linda Hutchison, Clerk to the Committee, and Leslie Ann Burns, Democratic Services Assistant. From the External Audit team, we're also joined by Rob Jones and Grace Scanlon. A number of these people have contributed immensely, and their teams, to the production of the year-end accounts, which we are going to review and hopefully approve today. And in particular, it's Margaret McCrosson's last attendance at the committee, and I'd like to express my personal thanks and appreciation for your support in the committee over the last 2.5 years and the many years before that. Thank you. We haven't asked the questions yet. That takes us on formally to today's agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
There are no apologies, Chair.
No apologies for absence, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are required to give, if there's any financial or non-financial interest in today's agenda. Are there any declarations to be made? And I'm seeing no all round. Thank you. Item 3, Chairman's report. So just one item to update you on since we last met, and that in my capacity as Chair of the Committee, I had a routine meeting with Rob Jones from the External Audit team on 20th of August. We discussed a range of issues, amongst other things, including basically the general local government sector and the update for that landscape in Scotland, corporate governance issues, and an update on the audit progress, which we can see in the agenda is now complete. So I'd simply ask that you note my report. Okay. So item number 4 is consideration of the 23-24 annual accounts for the Council's charitable trusts, and I'd like to invite Barbara Clark to speak to this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report has attached the consolidated accounts for the 6 charitable trust funds that the Council manages. Previously, these would have undergone a full ISA-compliant audit by our external auditors. However, in February of this year, Audit Scotland published updated guidance on the audit requirements for charity accounts, and in following this guidance, we have removed the need to obtain a costly full audit. Instead, the internal audit team of South Ayrshire Council have completed an independent examination which was very thorough, resulting in a clean certificate at no charge. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So the accounts are in the papers. I have one hand online immediately. If anyone else would like to ask a question, please indicate. Okay, I would take Councillor Ireland, then Councillor Edlin.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was in regard to the Netherley School 1937 Endowment Trust. I noticed that there's over 20,000 in that account, or under that, but that there has been no disbursements this year. Indeed, I'm not aware of that many disbursements that I've seen over the last few years for that. So I suppose my question was, is there anything that we can do as a council to help promote that? think the object of that is to advance the education of pupils and former pupils of the school by the provision of financial and other charitable assistance and support. I'm sure there must be people who come under that could benefit from that. So I suppose my question is, what can we do to promote this particular one?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ireland. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland. We do actually, I think, have something on our website that you can apply to the Netherley for the funds out of the Netherley Trust, and the main trustees of that trust are the head teacher and some of the support staff at Netherley Primary School. So it would be them who decide who could be awarded some financial gain from that.
Okay. Satisfied with that? We can move on to Councillor Edmonds' question.
I am, and thank you very much. I'll make sure to share that page on the website. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Edlund, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I can, pardon me. I noticed the relatively small sums involved in the management of these. There's small sums involved in this, and there's a lot of labour and staff time involved in managing these pro rata compared with other things that the council does. But I do think that these are charitable activities, and it's something we should look to expand on in the future. And this may be the wrong time to ask this question, but I can be guided in this. I am aware that the Provost has a fund for raising money for defibrillators in the county. And if this was a charitable trust and moves were made to establish a scheme for it, which can be done, it would mean that there would be tax benefits, recouped tax benefits to the tune of about 28% additional uplift in that money. And I wonder if there is an appetite now for doing this, bearing in mind we've got 6 other trusts. We just add one more to it, and the benefit for the people of Eastern Renfrewshire would be quite substantial. Could I ask if that could be considered at this time? I did ask before, and I felt there was a negative, how can I describe it, a negative response to my suggestion, shall we say, at that time. Unwelcome, thank you.
Certainly happy to take that on board and have a look into that for you.
Okay. Any further questions on item 4 on the agenda? No. I'd be happy to accept these accounts as proposed. Agreed. Okay. Agreed. Thank you. That takes us on now to item 5, which is the annual accounts of the council. So these are the fully audited year-end accounts to March 2024. And I'd like to invite to speak to this, first of all, Rob Jones from Ernst & Young, the external auditors.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, today in front of the committee we have our audit results report, annual audit report for the 23-24 financial statements. The report, just to clarify, is noted as provisional today, but it's always provisional up until the moment we sign the accounts, and then we'll reissue it as final. But just to confirm, there's no changes we expect to the content of the report. The report sets out our responsibilities to communicate to those charged with governance, the work we did around the 23-24 financial statements, and the subsequent wider scope work that we're required to do under the Audit Scotland Code of Practice. Obviously, it's a very extensive report with a lot of detail to fulfil our reporting requirements to both management, those charged with governance, but also Audit Scotland and the Accounts Commission. I was just going to draw to attention a few matters that we think are particular relevance for the committee and its consideration, but very happy to take any other questions on any matters of the report. So starting on page 7 of our report, I would just draw to attention the committee the materiality under which we set out or we undertook our financial statements audit work, and that there was a change from our initial planned materiality, reflecting the fact that due to the interim procedures we undertook and our risk assessment, we were able to increase the level of materiality from previous years, which we had left as a bit of as to be determined as part of our audit planning. So we've set out the full materiality on page 7 of our report. From page 9 of our report, we've set out the procedures we undertook specifically for the financial statements audit to ensure those are materially fair and accurate in their disclosures. And from page 10, we've set out the audit approach in detail, both for the council and the group aspect of the financial statements. Areas that I was going to specifically draw to attention for the committee start on page 14, where we've summarised what we refer to as our significant and fraud risks for the audit. And in particular, we have two what we refer to as fraud risks, which are around the risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition, and also the potential for misstatement due to fraud and error from management override. Sorry.
Just to pause you there a wee second, Rob, I appreciate your working to your audit report as a standalone. For Councillors' information, it begins at page 183, is page 14 of the report. It's just so members can follow what you're saying, that's all, Rob.
Would it be helpful if I found the page numbers for...
I think people can follow it from there. Thank you.
Sorry. We have our standard fraud risks. These again are under the under auditing standards. We're required to presume these risks exist, so no reflection on the council or specific risks or its arrangements, but we're required to assume in all cases these risks exist. We've set out our audit procedures and our conclusions in those areas with no matters to report to those charged with governance. The third significant risk that we have that we refer to, which is on page 18 of our reporting, is around the valuation of property, plant and equipment, which reflects the fact that both the significance of the balance is held by the council, but also the inherent level of complexity and judgment that's required in the valuations to ensure that they're fair and accurate and materially correct, requires us to consider additional work in this area. We set out on page 19 that we identified a number of we identified two material matters which were adjusted by management as part of our audit of that valuation work. And importantly as well, we draw to attention the agreed recommendations that we've made and management have accepted around ensuring that collectively we can work together to ensure that that process is a lot more efficient and obviously materially compliant with the code, with the accounting codes that the council is required to comply with. So we've set those out, and management's responses are in the appendix to our report. We also have an inherent risk around the valuation of the council's share of Strathclyde Pension Fund assets and liabilities, which we've set out our work on page 21 of our report. Again, no material matters to note. I would just draw to attention the sort of accounting peculiarities for the council, which is that currently the pension fund is in a net surplus position in terms of its share of assets against the future assumed liabilities. However, under accounting standards, there's what's referred to as an asset ceiling, where the council can only recognise that asset under particular circumstances, and essentially the accounting calculation this year resulted in that asset being capped at nil. So whilst there is a significant asset in terms of the difference between assets and liabilities, there is no asset recognised on the balance sheet of the council. There are a number of other accounting matters which we've set out our work on and reporting on, but I wasn't going to draw anything to the attention of the committee, as those matters were concluded with no material issues. So I was really just then going to summarise very briefly our approach to best value and wider scope audit, which is the additional work that we're required to undertake under the Code of Audit Practice as set by Audit Scotland. So in line with last year, we completed additional procedures and consideration of the 4 areas of wider scope, which are financial management, financial sustainability, vision, leadership and governance, and the use of resources to improve outcomes. And those areas, along with the specific focus-themed best value consideration, which Grace will talk to a separate report later on the agenda, they come together to form our assessment of whether or not the council can demonstrate best value in its work. Again, I wasn't going to go through the 4 areas of wider scope in any great detail. I suppose the obvious one to talk to a little bit would be financial sustainability, which probably unsurprisingly for the council, and certainly from previous discussions with management, really reflects the fact that obviously the continued financial challenges that the council faces, the significant uncertainty around forecasting, and the limitations that creates around really the council being able to demonstrate what it should, and clearly officers have stated would like to do, do, which is develop a published medium-term financial plan that fully aligns to the Council's goals and objectives. Obviously, we recognise the challenges around that, but we've commented on the circumstances there within the report. There were no specific matters around financial management, governance and leadership and governance, or the use of resources, which I particularly wanted to draw to attention to. Last year we commented on obviously I think the well understood challenges around internal audit capacity in previous years, but conscious that has been addressed at this stage, so obviously keep that under review going forward. We've also made some observations around management's arrangements around financial forecasting throughout the year, but no material or significant matters to raise there. And like I say, again, Grace will speak to the particular focus area of best value in her report later on. Again, I didn't have any specific matters I proposed to draw to attention there. And then the remaining appendices in the report really just fulfil our reporting requirements. They're the recommendations we've made to management and agreed actions with management going forward. I suppose those areas could broadly be broken into the areas around assets and valuations, which we've spoken to a little bit. Also a couple of forward-looking recommendations around things that are coming in terms of accounting standards, just to ensure management are aware and cited to that and have actions in place for that. And then obviously one around the financial sustainability position going forward, which we'll clearly keep under close observation. That was everything I was proposing to speak to. Very happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I'll open with a couple of questions, then move on to take questions from the floor. Thank you very much for the detailed overview of your work, Rob. The first question I have relates to page 189 of the whole council papers, or page 20 of the audit report. It's on recommendation 4 with regards infrastructure assets. So I think it'd be quite helpful to just get a kind of little overview of what an infrastructure asset is, and what are those information deficits that have been identified in your report?
Absolutely. So I suppose for context, this was a UK national issue that arose, I think, probably around 3 or 4 years ago now, which really reflected the fact that there was a recognition, I think originally raised by auditors, but obviously in terms of local authorities and their requirements for meeting the code of accounting practice, there was really a recognition that the nature of infrastructure assets in themselves, it made it very hard, and probably wasn't properly considered, historically, for a council to be able to demonstrate the ongoing existence of those assets. Essentially, if you just think about the types of things that infrastructure assets could be, obviously they're in the public domain, it's roads and bridges and things like that. And actually, it's very difficult for if you think about the other types of assets, it's very easy to identify that a school continues to exist and value the school or under the code. Equally with equipment, it's very easy to it's easier to identify if you've still got that, or if you've disposed of it or anything like that, whereas the infrastructure assets are inherently more challenging in that respect. But there's no essentially mechanism within the accounting code to reflect those challenges, and so councils essentially had on their balance sheet quite significant assets, obviously, because there's quite significant sums of money that go into this. It's actually very hard to demonstrate the existence or valuation of. A couple of years ago there was a statutory override and an amendment to the Code of Accounting Practice which was made to essentially strip out a few of those requirements to make it a little bit easier, but it's still left a few councils in quite a tricky position where actually they still couldn't demonstrate the historic existence of those assets in terms of the financial number that was on their balance sheet. So last year we did quite a bit of additional work to actually work with the council to make sure they could demonstrate that to a sufficient degree. The issue is that the statutory override is time limited, so at the end of next year, so there's 1 more year, but after that theoretically would go away, and at that point there isn't really a collective answer for how the council or auditors would get comfortable around the existence or valuation of those assets.
I suppose then the follow-up would be, you would expect that those information deficits could be overcome. There's a path to that.
So I think certainly in respect of existence going forward, it's probably easier, or it's possible to pull that information together. Obviously, the assets themselves, the historic ones, which are more problematic, will go down in value over time. Obviously, as they're depreciated on the balance sheet, and going forward, obviously management can ensure that more detailed records are retained. Quite often, obviously, if you think about the nature of these assets, it's very common that there's very detailed business cases and everything to support these, so actually it shouldn't be too problematic going forward. The issue would be, though, the valuation piece, which would be, again, there's no collective answer across to be totally transparent. Obviously, it's an issue for management in terms of their responsibility for these council accounts, but it is very much a national issue in terms of how any council would demonstrate that at that time without, a quite, probably insurmountable level of effort and work on all sides, essentially.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, for that. Any questions? Councillor Gordon-Wallace?
I wonder, what's your view on our borrowing in the future going to be approaching 10% of revenue? Is that something we need to be concerned about?
I'll speak to that briefly in terms of our considerations. That might be a question for management in terms of the council's arrangements for considering borrowing. But from our perspective, obviously our requirements are to ensure. We consider the overall council financial position and forecasts going out in terms of financial sustainability. And then from a borrowing perspective, we obviously consider that the council has complied with the specific requirements. It's required that it can't just borrow for any reason. It has to borrow for specific, allowable positions and ensure that borrowing is repaid over a period of time. So I would say, I think beyond that, I don't think we would have a huge amount of observations. I think the council, I don't think it's particularly out of the sector line in terms of its level of borrowing, and I think there's probably a wider conversation at a national level in terms of, there's, the extent of financing going forward in terms of, all councils, but this council being no different, and how it meets its, strategic objectives around a number of areas, which will clearly require, a level of investment in infrastructure in certain areas. But I suppose beyond that, all we would really observe is that the council is compliant with the financial management, sort of code requirements, essentially in terms of the level of borrowing and its, stated purpose or stated objectives in terms of the period of repayment.
So what you're saying is so long as the objectives are right, then the level of borrowing is neither here nor there. Is that...
So I think, the purpose of the purpose of the sort of the rules and the guidance around the levels of borrowing are to ensure that it is, I suppose, fundamentally prudent in that sense, or fundamentally sustainable, and the repayment as well, and obviously the way that the council set up are designed to ensure that the council recognises the cost of that borrowing over the course of the borrowing period. I suppose beyond that, it would really be a level of judgment around officers and for officers and members in terms of the sort of level of borrowing it would consider acceptable, I suppose.
So at what stage would you say, at what level would you say it was no longer prudent in level of borrowing? So,
I suppose in terms of the rules and regulations as they are, essentially, then the purpose would be that, the purpose of the rules is to ensure that the borrowing, I suppose, essentially kind of has to be prudent, because it has to be accounted for. It has to be, the cost of that borrowing has to be accounted for on an annual basis, and obviously that would be within the remit of the council being able to continue to set a balanced budget within those costs. So I suppose that, again, the purpose of the framework is really designed to ensure that actually any level of borrowing is accountable for within the framework under which the council has to set its annual budget. And again, the council, within that, then there's the other side of it, which is that the council has to then repay that borrowing overall, depending on the purpose for which it is within like an appropriate time frame. So it can't just borrow for however long out. It has to borrow if it's, for assets. It has to align to the period under which those assets are going to be of value to the council. So I don't think there's an answer to be where it's like X% of revenue or something would become. Yeah, sorry. I don't think it would be. Again, happy for management to speak to that, but I don't think there's a number at which point you would say it was prudent or not prudent.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Item 6 on the agenda reviews the Treasury Management Report, where we do that on a quarterly basis and annualised basis, and we look at the prudential indicators. So perhaps there's an opportunity to go into that in some more detail the next item on the agenda. Yeah. Okay. I do have a couple of questions myself, but I'll park them for just now and move over to Councillor Annette Ireland.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was about to bring that point up by myself because I had notes on the next paper around borrowing, but I'll hold fire until then. I had a couple of questions on this paper. It's really just the first bullet point. It's the question on the surplus that's reported of 6.844 million that's there. I wondered if it's possible to have a little bit more information about that, and I wondered if perhaps that was what Audit was referring to in the financial forecasting comment that was made. I was wondering if these were expected costs that are all listed, because we all have difficult decisions to make at budget time. A bit more information on that would be very welcome. And also on that point, there was a listed under garden waste. It was 300,000 under recovery of garden waste income. Is that solely just down to lack of uptake on the charges that have been rolled out? And are there any steps? Are there any steps in place to
quite helpful
to cover this?
If you could cite which page number of the report that you're
I don't have a number on this. It's the very first bullet point at the very first page of the paper, and it carries on into the next page. Okay. So it's really just to on that surplus and then on the garden waste figure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Margaret McCrossan's going to pick that up. Thank you.
To pick them up in order, the 6.8 million underspend, that was on the departmental operations of the council in 23-24, and that's what we reported when we wrote out to members when we were finalising the draft accounts, so earlier in the summer. But from memory, the major reasons for that were one-off non-recurring issues. So we had about 2 million, over 2 million of an increased recovery on interest on the council's investments, and that was partly because we were holding large volumes of cash which attracted a higher level of interest than in previous years, just because of the economic circumstances. And we'd agreed that we would hold a high level of cash because we wanted to avoid borrowing, and as our capital projects went forward, we were going to use our cash balances to fund those, to put off borrowing until interest rates came down a bit and were a bit more affordable. We did not have to spend as much of those cash balances as we had forecast because the progress on our capital projects was slower than we expected. So there's two reasons for that, that element. Firstly, our balances were higher than we'd forecast, and secondly, the prevailing interest rates throughout the year remained a lot higher than we expected. We had expected them to level off and start coming back down much earlier, but that wasn't the case. So well over £2 million was because of that. A further, I think about 2.7 million at least, was because of the historic VAT appeal recovery that the council brought in, and I think some of that actually dated way back to claims that we put in back in 2006 and a few others since then. So it's taken a very long time through a lot of UK authorities appealing against HMRC decisions, and the test cases finally exhausted the process and were found in council's favour. So we were one of the councils that benefited there, and not only did we get historic VAT on the income repaid to us, but we also got interest on it. So that was, we expected a large sum, and we did report that we did think we would get that during the year, but we didn't know that we were going to get that when we set the budget for the year. So yes, that was always going to be a big variance. And then the remainder, which is probably 2 to 3 million. That was down to, you made reference to, historically we usually underspend, and departments are a bit prudent throughout the year in terms of what they think they'll spend, because they never know what might happen towards the end of the year, and we inevitably end up with a bit of underspending, which crystallises particularly at the end of the year. Some of it was due to utility prices not being as bad as we'd thought. Some of it is due to staff turnover and vacancies, but that's, I suppose, more normal underspends. So that was on the whole 6.8. Your second question, a bit quicker to answer. It's on the waste, and the response to that is yes. When we set the budget and we were expecting increased charges on the brown bins, the uptake was not as high as we expected. We therefore recovered less income, but we have fixed that for future years' budgets, because for the current year's budget we adjusted our forecasts and our budget accordingly. So that has been resolved going forward.
And it's on page 19 and 20 of the papers. You have a supplementary question, Councillor? Are you quite happy with that?
I did, yes, just a quick one. And I note that these were one-offs, so thank you very much, Margaret, for that. Is there any indication of a surplus in the 24-25 budget as we move forward? Thank you.
We've only had one report, the Period 3 report, which went up earlier on this summer. It's forecasting a small surplus at the moment. The next one, we hope, will just continue to build on that and have a more accurate picture. We tend to find that as the year goes on, we confirm perhaps slightly larger underspends, but the big issues are the pay awards, which haven't yet been paid out, so we will have to see how much government grant comes our way and what the actual calculations come in as, particularly because it's a stepped award from low to high. It depends how many staff are in what grades, so it's not always easy to forecast, but as we go on throughout the year we'll get a much firmer view of that. Also, again, our big costs are staffing and utilities, and so far we've only had a few utility bills. We've not hit the worst of the winter. The good news is the actual rates per unit are slightly lower than we expected, but until we actually see what usage levels we're experiencing, we can't really close out what the final picture is. But we know what areas we're focusing on, and they are already showing little variances.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions from members? I'd like to throw a couple of questions at the mix myself. I think it's a question for external audit, this one. It's page 39 of your report, or page 208 of the full papers. The second paragraph down on the right hand side column there, it says the council's investment, speaking of the Oz Road project, Citydale project, it says the council's investment in this project is limited to 1.72 million. Is that a hard definitive limit? Because we know from press reports etc that there are delays to that project, and one would think more time equals more money. So are you confident that is definitive?
So I appreciate the question. I think probably a question of our wording, which actually we can probably reflect on. I suppose it's limited in the sense of at the point of the 23-24 financial statements, and then I suppose because from there I suppose we wouldn't really make a comment on anything that was uncertain in terms of management's plans or circumstances around the arrangements going forward. So I think that might maybe be a question for management beyond the figures that are in the accounts or in our report right now.
No, I understand. Perhaps I was reading a little too much into it and thinking that was probably a definitive guarantee.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit too. I'd take the point about the wording of the statement actually. That's fine.
Okay, that's super. Thank you very much. Thanks for the clarity. The second question, it may be actually for corporate management team. It's with regards to page 96, the movement in reserves. So we have the Whiteley Wind Farm Fund there, which has seen 2 transfers in to that reserve over the last couple of years. So 912k last year with 147k going in. Another 90k went in this year, bringing up to 1.149 million. But nothing's come out of that fund for 2 years. So I was just wondering, it's actually in a kind of similar vein to Councillor Ireland's question earlier about the trusts. Is there any kind of route map to community organisations applying to use that fund, or for elected members to perhaps petition for use for that fund? Someone can give some clarity on that at all?
That fund, as the Chair said, it's not one that we decide what to pass out. It's one where organisations have to come to us as trustees of that fund and apply. I think probably we'll ask the Director of Environment to come back with a bit more detail on how one applies to that fund, but I understand that the arrangements have been in place for quite some time, and I think the local organisations are well aware of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe they can explain why it's a bit low just now in terms of the applications, but I'd suggest that maybe get the Director of Environment to come back on that with the detail.
I have to admit, it's not often in my experience that there's more funds available than what communities want, so I think that would be quite helpful. Councillor Gordon-Wallace has his hand raised.
Just asking a similar vein, looking down that list, even for the Employee Wellbeing and Development Fund, 400k went in last year with a balance of 400, another 620 went in, making a total of 1,020 thousand. What is that fund, and why aren't we spending that, given one of the papers we're going to have later in the...
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. There has been quite a significant amount of money that has come out of that fund now. Some of that pays for a range of areas such as HR staff, to support professional development, to support staff well-being, and to support what we've spoken about previously around people, and our people being the greatest asset in our organisation. So there is a range of work that has started. There's a range of work to start, which will take up most of that fund going forward. And as we agreed and came to council previously, that is really in essence a whole range of work to make sure we have the best people that we possibly can within our organisation, both in terms of retaining staff, recruiting staff, and keeping the best staff here. And I think it's important that we have the right supports behind that. So, for example, within our OD, our operational development team, and to put in place the right professional developments for staff to ensure that we've got the right leadership and management skills, that we've got people coming through to be ready to come into promoted positions, that when people are here, that we keep them at their work, and we are working with our staff, really to make us an employer of choice, that we want people to be at East Hampshire. These things cost money, so there is no mainstream budget to do that. Unfortunately, these were largely taken away over the last probably 10, 12, 14 years of significant cuts, and that fund was there as a temporary way of trying to address some of those issues.
No, the question was not suggesting as to what it's for, just the fact that it was sitting there not doing anything. And I mean, we're all well aware of the budget strategy and all the rest of it as to what our problems are and what we're trying to do. It just appears as if with a 12-month period there, which money was lying there and not actually doing anything, but quite clearly it is now being spent, yeah.
It is, yes, and I think some of that is probably just a time lapse.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. Any other questions at all? I think everyone who's wanted to speak on this has now spoken. So the committee's been asked to remit this item to full council for consideration. Are we happy to do so? Okay, I think that's agreed. Okay, thank you very much everyone for that. Which now takes us on to item 6, the interim Treasury Management Report for 24-25, and it's the first quarter. And Barbara, it's over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As part of the Council's Treasury Management Strategy, the Chief Financial Officer is required to report on the quarterly activities of its Treasury Management operations, and this report is to achieve that requirement. This is a very high-level report showing the Council's debt position, along with graphs depicting the movement in investments and borrowing over the first 3 months of the financial year. From the report, you can see that there have been no changes in the long-term borrowing since that reported last month. This is due to the high levels of interest rates currently offered. As part of the Council's strategy, the percentage of variable rate loans should be no more than 15% of the total debt outstanding, and in the first 3 months of the year this peaked at just under 7.4%. This will creep up as PWLB loans are paid off or reduce as further loans are taken. With regard to the short-term investments, these have increased due to the cash flow in both capital and revenue. Both expenditure and income can fluctuate daily, depending on whether there has just been a large creditor run or government grants received. So the short-term balances reflect the cash flows movement. The prudential indicators in the report help to confirm that capital investment plans and treasury management decisions are affordable, prudent and sustainable. In particular, the operational boundary and authorised limit for external debt demonstrates that the Council is operating well within its limits, with the movement in these indicators resulting from a change to the profiling of capital spend since the indicators were first approved in February 24. Lastly, the report requests that the Committee recommend to the Council that the attached list of counterparties be approved. This has not changed from the counterparty list last approved as part of the year-end report. All the investments are restricted to UK bodies with high credit ratings, with the maximum period of investment restricted to 6 months. I'm happy to take any questions on the report, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara. Are there any questions on this? I appreciate there was some interest in the capital financing earlier in the meeting. People quite satisfied with what they heard then. Yeah. Can we accept the paper and the list of counterparties? Agreed? Okay, thank you. Item 7 is a report on the impact of hybrid working as previously requested by the committee, and I think it's yourself, Sharon, who's... Oh, Kath. Okay, Kath, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as you just stated, the report has been provided following a request from the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. Employees have had the opportunity to work on a hybrid basis for many years. Previously, this was called agile working. Hybrid working applies to approximately 13% of our workforce, therefore a relatively low figure. The majority of our employees are classed as fixed, which means they spend 90% of their working time in a fixed location, such as teachers and customer first. Hybrid working is not a formal arrangement. Contracts of employment have not been amended to reflect hybrid working. The report covers a number of advantages and disadvantages of hybrid working. Ultimately, managers are responsible for ensuring that where they have hybrid working arrangements in place, they are managing these effectively to ensure there isn't a negative impact on their teams from a developmental or operational point of view. The report includes benchmarking against other local authorities to demonstrate how we compare. To conclude, hybrid working is not a new practice in our council. It differs from home working and in that employees are expected to attend the office. We have clear guidelines for managers and employees which explain our expectations where people work in a hybrid way. The nature of work is changing and so are employee expectations. Hybrid working is now common across local government and all other sectors. Overall, hybrid working has a number of advantages for both the Council and our employees, and we will continue to monitor our approach to this. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from committee members? Yeah, Gordon?
When you say you're continuing to monitor, what exactly are you monitoring?
Sorry, just really any feedback that we receive from managers or from employees.
And have we had any such feedback?
I think we monitor feedback. We've not had anything negative. There's always management and leadership development needs, and Stephen touched on the one that we're looking at leadership and management development, and some of that's about how you deal with different situations. So one of the disadvantages is about communication when you've got hybrid teams, but that is a part of modern working life now, and that's something that some managers can maybe look for help in how they deal with. But I think that's courses that we do have available and that we've actually invested quite heavily in, and that's where we see managers participating in that. I think we actually get really positive feedback overall from the workforce. There is a desire for people to work in this way. We also are able to recruit from a vaster pool of people as well, and we do get that feedback. We see some of the stats show that I guess national surveys show that you get more applicants if you offer hybrid working, and we have definitely seen roles where we've struggled to recruit in the past. Maybe if I use the example of ICT and digital roles, where we now get better pools of applicants as well because we publicise more. So I would say that that's the type of feedback we look for. We look for feedback through, I guess there's our recruitment numbers and where we struggle to recruit and try to understand the reasons, but also there's the soft feedback we get as well with regards to development of teams and be that individuals and managers as well, leadership.
Okay, follow-up question, yeah?
Yeah, how do you monitor something like, for example, management bullying, for example, okay, when an employee is maybe being bullied, but under normal circumstances within an office environment, that becomes quite prominent, and people become quite sensitive and aware to it and alerted to it. The reason I'm asking is I'm aware of situations in which that has occurred. I'm not saying within this organisation, but where it has occurred, and it's come as a direct result of hybrid working, in which that close overall kind of surveillance that happens within the natural environment within an office, and where it's actually happening in communications out with the normal within that hybrid environment. How do you monitor something like that? Because invariably what will happen is the individuals who are being bullied will not want to say anything because of potential repercussions. Have we thought of that, Frank?
Well, we do have policies. We've always had policies. I would say that's bullying and harassment in any form of intimidation is a situation that you don't want in the workplace, but we know it exists, hopefully not within this workplace, but we know it exists in workplaces. So we've got policies that deals with that, and I would say that's not related to hybrid working. Maybe you feel that, I don't know the situation you're talking about, but if there's maybe somebody you've spoke to that feels that they have been isolated because of hybrid working, I would say it's not. We as a council encourage people to be in the office, and that's purposely so that they do get they're sitting within their teams, they're able to learn from others. But as I say, we do have a bullying and harassment policy, we've got a whistleblowing policy, there is routes into HR if they don't want to speak to the manager, so we encourage that. We've got health and wellbeing, we've got a health and wellbeing officer who works out with teams and actually works with people about resilience and actually is available for one-to-one consultations. So I think we have got a number of routes and we are publicising a lot of that. We're improving our communications now through our insider magazine, so we are, and we're doing that to all parts of the workforce. So we are trying to make it people more aware of all the routes in and how they can have a voice in the organisation. And also, obviously, there's our trade union colleagues. So if there's anything, somebody would go to their trade unions and they would encourage them to talk to us directly. But if not, they sometimes act as an intermediary for us to talk with people as well if there's a concerning issue or case that's been having to be dealt with.
Okay, yeah.
And how do we monitor productivity, hybrid versus full-time?
Yeah, Stephen, yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Wallace. I think we would all recognise that the workplace is an ever-changing environment, and hybrid working, as Sharon and both Karen and Kath and Sharon have alluded to, is not new, it's just more prevalent, and it's just part of that evolution of working practice. So I think your question here is absolutely pertinent, and that is that the more important part and the most important part for myself as the Chief Executive in the organisation, and indeed all leaders and managers and elected members, is not so much how people work, but much more about what about the performance of what we do. And the performance of what we do really for me is about what are the services that we ultimately deliver to our communities. That will be the judge of how well we do. If we look at how we measure that performance, there's a number of ways of doing it, such as local government benchmarking framework quality indicators. There is our improvement planning, there is our outcome development plan, there is our place to grow, which we will work with, there are the review meetings that happen consistently. So there are a whole number of mechanisms of how we determine and how we both evaluate our own performance internally and how we are measured against other local authorities externally. I would suggest, and certainly, many councillors here have been here a lot longer than I have, that East Renfrewshire have historically and continue to perform exceptionally well across a whole range of measures, and in others we consistently try to improve even further of how we are performing. Part of that, of course, is how we work, and that is a question I often ask the teams in respect of, are we getting the best from our people? Are we giving them the conditions that allow them to perform at their best? And part of that is home working, when it is appropriate, the best place to carry out that role? And it's touching on your other question about well-being in the workplace. And I think that's something that our HR team really do pretty well in respect of making sure that no individual member of staff is isolated and working at home. That if they're not in the office and they're not in regular contact, why? Because for some people, being in an office situation is their interaction with the rest of the world. So we need to ensure that we look after their well-being in that respect. But ultimately, what we want to do as an organisation, this is not about what suits the individual. This is about ultimately and first and foremost what suits the organisation. And that's important. But in suiting the organisation, if I am struggling to recruit in a certain discipline, which we are in local authority, if the difference is between that person going into the private sector and they're asked to go in 5 days a week to a city office, and I can get them doing the work they need to do through being in the office 2 or 3 days, having maybe a slightly different working arrangement, but working at home some of the time where that suits their family life. If that means we get that person into our organisation, then we work on that basis, because everyone else are our competitors. And when you're in competition, you do what you need to do to win that competition and get the very best talent here in East Renfrewshire. So that's one of the reasons. Ultimately, it helps the individual. That's terrific. But the primary aim is to support this organisation and get us the best people to come here to East Renfrewshire. Okay, yeah?
Yeah, just to come back, I mean, fully empathise with what you're saying, but what about the situation? I mean, there seems to be no kind of hard and fast, well, it seems to be more guidance, if you like. What about the situation? I hear what you're saying about we're competing with the private sector and conditions, etc. What about a situation in which we feel that an individual should actually be in here 4 days a week and not 2 days a month? Can we, or do we force that situation? And can you give me maybe examples where that's happened? Thanks.
Absolutely, Councillor Ross. This isn't about the individual. If the need of the job is to be here 5 days a week, then I expect someone here 5 days a week. If, in conversation with their manager, the job can be done over a hybrid role, then that's fine. That's great. That's good to do so. If the job can be done under certain different hours, that's fine. But for example, the most obvious one is I can't have a teacher working at home, and nor can I have a teacher deciding to work from 3 till 10, because there are no children and young people there. They have to be in the classroom. I'm sorry, there is no alternative. That's the same, and I think Kath alluded to it in her introduction. 90% of our staff, I think, or something of that ilk, maybe slightly less than that, are in the workplace essentially all day, every day. It is a very small percentage of our workforce who have even the luxury or the opportunity where the service allows it. But ultimately, if a manager is saying you need to be here to carry out your role, I expect them to be here.
Yeah, and then we'll move over to Councillor Ireland.
Sorry, Councillor Ireland, if you just let me finish with this one, which is, I hear what you're saying in terms of benchmarking, but I mean, if we're benchmarking ourselves against other organisations who are doing exactly the same, doing exactly the same policies like other authorities, then quite clearly it doesn't take into account on the loss of performance overall within all the organisations. I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that you are managing it closely. Our duty here is just to challenge some of the decisions here and just to make sure that we are monitoring this closely, because at the end of the day, it's the taxpayer that's expecting a return for the money. And I appreciate what you're doing in looking after our personnel and our staff. Very, very important, but just to make sure that we're also looking after the people who are paying the bills. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Annette Ireland, next question.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was 2 questions I had. One of them, and forgive me if I picked it up wrong when you were discussing it, but I thought I heard that no contracts have been amended to include hybrid working. I wondered, first of all, if there were any plans to integrate this into any of the staff's contracts, and forgive me if I have picked that up wrong, but that's my question on that. And second question would be, there's a list of advantages to hybrid working. One of them is employer cost savings. I wondered if any work had been done to try and cost out the savings of hybrid remote working that we currently have at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, Sharon, Kath, between Stephen again? Okay, thank you, Kath.
I can answer the first question on contracts. So no contracts of employment have been amended, and at present there's no plans to do so.
Okay, and in terms of the second question, in terms of the cost savings?
Thanks, Councillor, and if I can give you a concrete example, if that may help. At the end of next year, we will move out of our lease with Spears Bridge, and the staff there will move into, whether it be Barhead and indeed the depot and here, as the 3 main offices. That will save the council, as previously put to council, something in the region of £500,000 a year. That's an example of some of the savings that we can make, because if everyone's still in the office 5 days a week, we wouldn't have been able to do that. That's a concrete example, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Last chance of any questions on this before we move on? No, okay, moving on. Item 8.
Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor MacDonald. Oh, thank you, thanks for letting me know. Councillor Ireland.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for letting me come back. Thank you very much for that concrete example, but what I was wondering was, is there any future work that's going to be undertaken to kind of look at savings across the council for hybrid remote working? I understand the point that the Chief Exec was making, and he knows my thoughts on that one, but it's just a larger piece of work planned in the future to look at that as we move forward.
So in terms of things like IT and beyond the office premises? Yeah, I understand. Yes. Is someone able to...
Right, well, I guess I understand the question now. I wasn't quite clear to start with. So I guess that's something that will continually be reviewed, because obviously as we move the builds and consolidate into a smaller number of buildings, we'll then be able to look at, right, what's the other supplies or contracts that we use as an organisation that we can maybe then reduce. So I would say that's something that will continue to be on the agenda and we'll continue to look at.
Okay, I think Louise Pringle has a hand raised. Yeah, Louise.
I was just going to highlight that there were savings quoted in the digital transformation paper that went to Cabinet recently that were about mileage costs. So I know that's not home working, but it is about the utilisation of technology like this to prevent people travelling between meetings. So there were quite substantial savings in that, which we'll monitor on an ongoing basis. Thanks.
I suppose that illustrates the point that remote working is not necessarily working from home. It could be working from another alternative office space. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So item 8, annual sickness absence report. So staying with HR and back over to Kath. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll present the annual sickness absence report, which covers the financial year 23-24. Overall, council-wide absence has reduced from 11.15 days in 22-23 to 10.96 average days per FTE in 23-24. Local government absence has reduced from 14.2 days to 13.88 days, and teacher absence has a very minimal increase from 5.5 days to 5.81 days. The report includes comparison data from the local government benchmarking framework. This data compares local government and teacher absence across all other Scottish local authorities. For teacher absence, we're placed 3rd out of 32 councils, meaning that we have the 3rd lowest absence, which is an improvement on the previous year where we were placed 5th. For local government absence, we're placed at 13th out of 32 councils, which is a significant improvement compared to the previous year where we were placed 21st. Figure 4 in the report displays local government top 5 absence reasons, and it shows that while stress non-work related absence continues to be the highest absence reason by the number of days lost, gastrointestinal disorders have a higher number of staff absent. For teacher absence, stress non-work related also had the highest number of days lost, however more employees were absent with flu and colds. The report highlights sickness absence research regarding the demographic of local government workforces being engaged in often physically demanding roles and the fact that workforce tends to be older and more susceptible to health issues. As stated in the report, a new sickness absence policy has been developed and it's been signed off by the corporate management team. This policy reduces the complexity of current processes and training will be rolled out to managers on a face-to-face basis. We continue to focus very much on employee health and wellbeing initiatives to help create environments where employees feel listened to and are treated with kindness. Wellbeing initiatives are very important to help support staff to remain at work and reduce overall sickness absence levels. Managing absence remains an important aspect of line managers' jobs and they continue to receive HR support as required. In summary, absence levels have reduced overall and we're performing well in comparison to other local government employers. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can kick off the questions, Kath. So just to kind of understand, I think my initial understanding reading this paper was confirmed by what you said there. So like figure 4 shows non-work related stress is 6436 lost days. I've just rounded to the nearest whole number across 218 full-time equivalent. So that's an average of 29.5 days. Of course, not every absence will be 29.5 days, it's just the average. As compared to gastro disorders, where it's around 3.7 days, which, you know, everyone's had these illnesses in the past, we know it tends to be 3-4 days. Is that the correct understanding of reading this report?
Yes, that's correct. So if you add up all those different types of absences and all the employees, that's how we get to the overall performance indicator. But yes, you're right. With the stress non-work related, it's the top figure of 6436, which is the number of days lost, and the below figure, that's the number of employees. I
remember when we discussed this last year, and it was a pretty unified view of the committee that, you know, a degree of extra detail and analysis would be helpful in terms of setting the context. I think I would agree that this additional level of detail does provide a lot more context, because when you look at the average, I think, well, was that 11 days per person per year? That's quite a lot. But actually, I think what we're looking at here is there's quite a lot of days being contributed by a small number of people. So in terms of a management challenge, in terms of dealing with that, would that make the challenge easier because it is a smaller number of people rather than It's not every employee in the council, it's a small minority with high numbers of absence.
Yeah, so it's certainly not every employee, but certainly one person being off long-term sick can be quite a lot of work for a manager, which is one of the reasons why we've looked at creating an improved process for managing absence, so taking a number of different policies and putting them into one. And then by having face-to-face training with managers, we can make sure that where they do have absence within their teams, they'll feel capable and able to manage it.
Thank you, and I think that actually kind of follows on quite nicely to the next question I had, which is in paragraph 18, page 263, where you've cited the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. So I think that's a general observation that line managers in all organisations need more training and support to manage sickness absence. Are there any particular needs for that identified within East Renfrewshire Council?
I think just through the volume of queries that we deal with in HR, we can see that, I mean, our current processes are complex and each employee absence is different. So it's not like you could manage one absence, then know automatically how to deal with somebody else. And everybody is obviously an individual. So again, knowing the challenges that managers face with managing absence, by rolling out face-to-face training and having a very clear, straightforward policy, that will help them. And as I said in the report, HR will continue to support managers.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members? Councillor Edlin.
Thank you for this. My questions to Stephen relating to the overall levels. Do you think that it would be reasonable for our residents and council taxpayers to expect that with this council making many changes, for positive changes I would say, that they can expect absences to be moving towards the level that occur in the private sector rather than the public sector going forward? I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to say. I also, looking at these numbers, I would have expected the absence level in the older age group of employees to be higher than it actually is compared to the younger age group, based on the fact morbidity increases with age. And can I have some comments about that? Also, I wondered if you're prepared to think outside the box in terms of incentives that could encourage employees towards less absence. One of these could be, for example, influenza, colds, respiratory viruses account for a large number of absences in younger people. Would the council consider paying privately for these people to be, they're not eligible for immunisation under the NHS at the moment. I think, would it be worthwhile, it would cost about £15 to get an influenza vaccine at a local pharmacy, and the effects on the number of days absent from work could be quite dramatic. I mean, obviously you can't compel people to do that, but you could incentivise it. And all these things are slightly out with the box, the normal box, shall I say, at the moment. And I wonder if we could look towards moving in that direction over the next year, so that we can see a dramatic improvement in this figure going forward, and these figures going forward. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question there was on the comparison with the private sector numbers. Stephen, you okay to pick that up, yeah?
Thank you, Councillor Edlin, for your questions. I'll take some of them, and perhaps Sharon and Kath may pick up some of those if that's okay. In respect of comparisons, I would just in the first instance ask people to exercise a little caution when you're comparing statistics. Believe it or not, it was my background, so that's and I always have a real worry sometimes when we look at statistics on their own. Even if we look at it within the council, and we can use the same analysis for private and public sector, I don't think it's reasonable to compare perhaps my absence when I have had the opportunity throughout my working life to work largely either in a warm building or in an office, and compare that perhaps with someone who I worked with last Monday, a squad of 4 men, the youngest of whom was 58, and who had all worked in manual labour outside since they were 16 years old. To compare my absence levels with their absence levels, I'm not sure is a fair comparison. And I say that when we look at the private sector absence statistics, often we are looking at professional absence statistics. And if we really want to compare that, I think you would need to compare that only with, for example, perhaps the Chief Exec's office, all of the staff within my office all have that same, and have probably had that same role of the luxury of either, as we spoke about earlier perhaps, hybrid working, warm office, really good conditions. That would probably be akin to absence in the private sector. That said, you're absolutely right to highlight it, and it's something we must continually work really hard as a council to try and lower. I absolutely accept that and take that on board. Whether that can be a dramatic change, I'm not so sure, but it's working towards incremental change of absence becoming lower and lower. Tina spoke about the new absence policy, and that is absolutely the right thing to do, and hopefully that will help. But what is also important is how people use and interpret that policy, and especially managers, because it's not always an easy thing to do. Within our leadership management programme, we will now ask all of our staff to go on a face-to-face training session over time to allow them to become more confident in using that. However, as we alluded to, that's for a small amount of people who are generally absent from work. There are large amounts of people in this council who are very rarely, if ever, off their work. And what is really important, I go back to the earlier point, it's the conditions we create in the workplace, I think, that will keep people at their work. You know, the terms and conditions, they enjoy being at work, they're happy to be at work. It's a place where you come to learn, it's a place where you can advance your career, it's a place where you've got good colleagues. That's what brings people to work. And where they're not brought to work and where they're not at work, we use appropriate absence policies to help manage people back into the workplace quicker than we have perhaps traditionally done so. And that's the bit I think we have to work on. So you're absolutely right in respect of that, Councillor Edlin. I couldn't agree more with you. It is a journey, and it is something we need to work hard on to continually improve. I just ask you, though, to have a little bit of caution, if you were able, around public and private comparisons, because I don't think it's necessarily always a fair comparison. Thank you.
Okay, I think the second component of Councillor Edlin's question was around incentivised flu vaccines, vaccinations, that sort of thing.
That was the third bit, but I can come in and answer that, and then Kath will answer the bit about maybe the age bands as well. So you said about, could we maybe think out the box and look at things like flu immunisation. So that is something that has been offered right in the past. So through the HSCP, you'll maybe be aware that actually all those that work in health-related roles do get offered that as standard. There is changes this year to what has been offered for flu immunisation, so there will be less staff, you know, that are able to access that, because some of the age bands as well have changed for flu immunisation. Previously we have worked with HSCP as well, and we've looked at what's the benefits of paying, the cost benefits against paying for everybody to get a flu vaccination versus, you know, what we think that would save us with people coming to work. And at that point, now it was a number of years ago, but at that point it was quite negligible, and in HSCP's recommendation at that time we didn't mandate it. However, during the pandemic years we did offer it to staff. We did say to staff, if you want to go and get the flu vaccination, please do so and we will reimburse you. Obviously that's one of the things, we cannot force people to go and get a flu vaccination even if we think that's a great idea for everybody, and the uptake is very low. So even during the pandemic times it was very low for staff doing that. So there's not, it's something we do continue to look at, and we will continue to monitor and we'll continue to benchmark other organisations in that area. So I don't want you to think that's something we're not looking at, but the evidence isn't compelling just now for us to do that, but we continue to support our staff that work through the HSCP to get the access to flu vaccination at this stage. And Kath, do you want to answer about that?
So I can answer in terms of the age bands. So at figure 8, it shows the local government absence by age bands, and you pointed out that the 30 to 39-year-olds had 35% of the absence. But actually, as per the report, whilst it shows that 30 to 39, it appears that they have larger absence. Actually, there's actually that number of people, or that percentage of that age within the council. So you'd almost expect, if 35% of the council are between 30 and 39, that's probably about the level of absence you'd expect. The area that we're probably most concerned about is the area of the 50 to 59-year-olds. So in the graph, it looks like they have 26% absence, but actually we've only got 15% of our employees in that age bracket. So what we're trying to do is look at the data and compare it to actual workforce information. So you look at the absence, you look at the workforce information, and that's how we're looking at where we've got a concern. So our concern area there isn't 30 to 39, it's the 50 to 59-year-olds. Does that explain it?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I would say that if that is the case, then they would be the ones that would most benefit from complementary or incentivised vaccinations, especially as at that age group their immunological response is diminished from people in the younger age groups. So it would be much better for them, not just from work, but in their whole lifestyle. In terms of that, and I heard what Stephen, what you Chief Executive said. I can't agree that people who work in the private sector are not doing the heavy work that some of our workforce do. So I find that the comparison to say that it's not, you're comparing apples and oranges. I reluctantly don't agree with what you've said in that, because I'm sure there are many private firms where people are doing what are heavy physical work or antisocial work. So I think the comparison is there. I think it is fair to look at that. But I think year on year, I would like to be able to come back every year and see an improvement in the numbers that we're getting back. I think that's something that our residents would like to see. But thank you for your answers.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Sharon, yeah.
I guess I would, Councillor Edlin, I maybe would refer you to paragraph 19 in the report, because that's where data is shared from the Office of National Statistics. So that's basically talking about different sectors and the reasons. And I think that work nationally demonstrates that private sector organisations will have better absence, and some of the reasons behind that. That doesn't mean to say that we're not going to continue to work at that and work at looking at how we can improve, because it's about our employees. We want to make sure we have the best for our employees. But I think there's different challenges in both private and public sector.
Thank you. So there's two questions online, and then Councillor Wallace has indicated also. So Councillor MacDonald is up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief point, and that was it seems to me that there's probably a direct connection between the lowering of these numbers over the passage of time over the last few years, and that is probably, there's a direct connection between that and hybrid working. And I was actually going to raise this in the previous agenda item, but it's actually quite convenient it's come up here. It seems to me that hybrid working, the way that we are involving people now, that illnesses that people might suffer, so for instance COVID, inhibit somebody from being able to come into the office because obviously they don't want to infect their work colleagues, but they would still consider themselves fit enough to be able to participate in meetings, and thus not being absent by being able to participate remotely. So I do think that there's a direct connection there in terms of the lowering of the numbers, and ultimately that plays into the productivity of why hybrid working is quite important within certain roles in the council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Was there any particular question there that you wanted to put, or was it just an observation, Councillor?
Just an observation, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Annette Ireland.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do think, before I get to my question, it's important to know that sickness absence rates in the private sector in the UK have been rising quite dramatically year on year recently, which is why I want to say thank you for all the hard work that's been done over the last, since we last received the paper on this, where the figures, we were at 21st place and now we're 13th due to there's a lot of hard work being put in, and that's us now more in line with the Scottish average. And then teacher numbers, the absences in teachers, we're now well above the Scottish average. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for all the hard work that's obviously been put into this. Now, I did have a question. In the last report that was brought to us, where we had those figures where we were down previously, but there was mention that we had a health and wellbeing officer. Is that someone who's still in place at the moment?
Yes, that post is still in place at this point in time, yeah.
That's fantastic, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Gordon-Wallace, yeah.
Just going to, Chief Executive, you mentioned your statistics as one of your fortes. What's meant, for example, we refer to days off as a number of days off when we're gauging absenteeism. How does it? I know a number of organisations will do this in percentage terms. So if an organisation said, say, for example, had say 3% absenteeism, what does that relate to in numbers?
I was going to say, we don't measure in percentages because the standard in local government is days per full-time equivalent. But we could, if offline, we could come back to you with what that roughly is as a percentage absence.
I had the great privilege of having a tour of a chilled and frozen food operation, employing about 150 odd people, and they did have problems and have had over recent years, as the food industry has over recent years, attracting and keeping staff. But what I would say, and they've significantly invested in just exactly what you're talking about in terms of making people feel valued, having respect for people, and making sure the working place is an environment that people wish to work in and are attracted to. But, you know, I've mentioned about conditions that people are working in. This particular business I visited, it was hard graft, and it was in conditions in which you're operating, generally speaking, round about 12 degrees centigrade on average, but then you're stepping into freezers and chill units and this type of thing. You're working on hard concrete floors for 7.5-hour shifts, maybe with a half-hour break in between. And, you know, they were reporting, the reason I ask is because I'd like to do a fair comparison here. They were reporting, because of the difficulties, and invested heavily in this, in trying to make it as comfortable environment as you can do with that type of business, were reporting 3% absenteeism, which they felt was absolutely superb compared with what the industry has faced before. So I'd like, you know, just as a maybe off record one, is to find out what that relates to, because tough conditions they were working in. So I would say it would be a very reasonable comparison to what we're doing here, and particularly when you're mentioning to people that are working outdoors and working with the infirm and what have you. Thank you.
I think that's a very apt observation, because when you look at, you know, the private sector, sickness, it might be like 6 days per year, but I think if you're looking at different sectors within the private sector, you would see a lot of variance, because there are, of course, private refuse collection firms, there are, of course, private home care firms. So there's perhaps specific sectors that we could look at, which would somewhat more closely mirror the council's operations than, you know, a general figure for the whole economy. Are there any other questions or points to add in this? No. I would simply reflect, when we look at the Best Value Thematic Report and Workforce Planning, that actually specifically references on page 295 that the Audit and Scrutiny Committee has responsibility for oversight of the sickness absence key performance indicator, and obviously everyone's had a good opportunity to go through this afternoon, and we will continue to do so in the months and years to come. So thank you very much for the report and for all of your answers this afternoon. And the Provost just caught me in time.
Thank you very much, Chair. Before you move on to the I register that I have to leave the meeting at this point, please, so that I can get in for the full council meeting preparation.
Okay, we may still be here. Okay, see you soon, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you, thanks.
Okay, moving on in that case, it's item 9 on the agenda. It's the review of the Strategic Risk Register and a presentation on its use. And I'd like to invite Anthony Jenkins, the Council's Resilience Manager, to speak to this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. The report is primarily an overview of the Strategic Risk Register and the changes that have been made since we previously discussed in March. It's worth noting that the Strategic Risk Register is a live document, so it is updated regularly. They're agreed primarily on an every other month basis through the corporate management team. Probably a prime example of that within the Strategic Risk Register would be in relation to risk 3.9 and shortness of accommodation. That wording was prepared and the risk register was taken on the 10th of September, so prior to the Council's declaration of a housing emergency. In our next review of the corporate management team, that is one of the risks that we have to consider the wording upon. That next review is in early October. By way of the changes since the March review, the two primary changes that have been made is the removal of two risks. One of those was 6.26, previously in the risk register, which is in relation to the resettlement of displaced persons. Now that's now been captured within relevant departmental arrangements, primarily HSCP and environment. Part of that is just down to the lower volume of resettled persons coming from conflicts such as Ukraine. Should there ever be escalations or new conflicts where we are hosting resettled persons, the corporate management team could take a view on whether to put that back onto the corporate strategic risk register. The other risk that has been removed that was in during March's review was 6.30, which pertained to a short notice UK general election across 24, early 25. That's been removed as the general election took place in July this year and was successfully delivered by council staff. The table at paragraph 10 into 11 have outlined the changes that have been made. Primarily these are to the risk wording, so risk 3.9 has had some changes in wording and obviously intimated that that might come back for more changes in wording. And then beyond that, the changes are in relation to some of the proposed controls being realised and now moved into existing controls. As I say, the corporate management team review on a 2-monthly basis. I'll come back to a bit more of the layout and that review in the slides. The corporate management team also had a risk management workshop on Monday of this week with the council's insurance providers. That focused a lot on best practice, so the provider, the course facilitator, questioned some of our wording and our approach to risk, which I found quite useful, particularly given that this is a public-facing document. So through the regular corporate management team reviews, we'll consider whether some of that wording can be simplified so that it's easier to understand for the public. Likewise, if some of those controls can be better articulated. The intent is that we'll follow up on that training on a departmental basis to support the kind of flow of risks from departmental project level to and from the strategic risk register, and that will also support enhancements and the review in 25 of our risk management framework and strategy. That's it in terms of report for myself. I'm happy to pause, or if you want me to keep going with the slides, I'll take your view on that, Chair.
I think I would continue with the whole presentation, and then see if there are any questions then, because what you say may answer questions that would be put to you. So,
no problem. I will share that on screen. So it really is 3 slides to look at the structure and layout of the Strategic Risk Register, our supporting documentation and the review process that's carried out through the corporate management team. I say 3 slides, this is one of the 3. So firstly, looking at the Strategic Risk Register and how it's made up. We obviously use an Excel document. I appreciate the group gets it through a PDF. One of the changes I should have highlighted actually in discussion was to the change log and to the removed risks tab on that strategic risk register. We've filtered them so that hopefully it's a bit more reader friendly in PDF. I did notice with the change log there's maybe a wee bit more work still to be done there as it was carrying on to a second page. But the layout is primarily through tabs on Excel. There's an overview tab, which is essentially our covering statement, highlights our scoring methodology, that it's a combination of likelihood and impact, and how we arrive at whether something is red, amber, green. The next 5 tabs are based on our 5 outcomes and outcome delivery plan, with risks organised into those areas. And the final 2 tabs of the risk register are our change log and removed risks log, which will look to highlight where we changed them, why we changed them, and I'll kind of keep that filtered so that it's between audit and scrutiny committees, reflecting that we're here twice a year to discuss that. The change log will also reflect, or should reflect, why we've added risks or why we've changed the wording and where we have changed that wording. And the removed risks will hopefully have the justification behind that. The makeup of risks and the risk register itself is fairly consistent across the departmental and strategic risk register, and that you'll have a risk description, the controls that are in place, a scoring, proposed further controls, and then a revised scoring along with a responsible person. I suppose one area to draw attention to would be that very first tab in the strategic risk register that has a C, an S or an N status, and that's just if a risk has been changed, if it's the same as it was at previous reporting, or if it's new, and there'll be a date for when either the risk was changed or added last. Change logs were covered and the removed risk logs were covered, so can move into more of the supporting documentation and the methodology for review. So primarily the support to the strategic risk register comes from our departmental and our project risk registers, with departments kind of determining through the corporate management team and their reporting at those other monthly reviews on whether they believe something is a new risk that should be considered for inclusion if changes to their existing risks should be included. But equally, it's a two-way process. So with the corporate management team considering risks to be removed, so that the 2 that we highlighted within the report, that resettlement of displaced persons, that risk hasn't went anywhere, and now just sits on departmental risk registers for 2. The areas could potentially sit in a project risk register if there was a standalone project risk register for that. The risk management strategy and framework are kind of our 2 key other supporting documents that set our approach to managing risks, the procedures for identifying, analysing, assessing risks. This in turn should inform our planning and policy, financial planning, service planning, performance and project management to a degree. And obviously within the risk management strategy, it reflects that we report twice a year to this forum and to Cabinet. The framework is more about our key concepts that are involved in our approach to risk management. As I've highlighted, both are due next year for a full review. I believe that goes through Cabinet, but happy to make sure that's cited. The CMT review, I've said it a few times now, it's a 2-monthly process. It considers the existing content to ensure that it's up to date and reflective of the current situation. Departments should review their own arrangements, what they have within the strategic risk register, and a degree of horizon scanning of anything that's kind of causing concern or emerging for them, which would in turn inform those discussions at CMT, corporate management team, and maybe kind of thinking outside the box of some priority areas. The training undertaken this week should also eventually lead to kind of iterative improvements as that's rolled out both to departments for their own risk registers. Part of the discussions at the next corporate management team will be what we've learned from that training on the 23rd. I think that's it for myself at this point, and you probably had enough of my dulcet tones, so I've stopped sharing the slides. Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you very much for the presentation. I think that's helpful to give some context to what this report is, and we see it frequently. Just to clarify, in terms of the point risk 3.9 on housing, I understand the explanation that this document was prepared prior to the Council's decision to declare house an emergency, but I think it's worth just asking that the fact that's not included in here, does that have any operational impact or any kind of risk response impact, the fact that it's not included just now?
Not at this time, no. It would just purely be our next review at CMT. We would look at the wording and make sure it's appropriate and reflective of that, but certainly the controls and proposed controls, this had been something that the department had been considering for a while when they regularly review those areas in the risk register.
Yeah, I think that's helpful clarification. Thank you. Any questions from members at all? Yeah, Councillor Gordon Wallace. Yeah.
Yeah, we get a risk register coming every year or so, and what's interesting, what I would be interested in hearing is how actually CMT actually use this risk register in practice. How is it used? I mean, quite clearly putting the list together. An example of a decision-making process that might be influenced by one of these. When you are making a decision or a policy decision, okay, I appreciate that's more maybe a political thing, but where a decision is made, do you refer to this risk register? Right, let's have a wee look at the risk register and see how that impacts and what we're talking about, or is it just something that it's assumed that CMT are, because they put this together, are aware of these problems anyway, or risks?
Can I check who's the best person to pick that up? Would it be Louise or yourself? Okay, Chief Executive, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. It's actually a very pertinent question, and I'm wondering if you were standing at the door on Monday when we had the training and the additional support from Zurich, who were in supporting CMT. And it's really that how do you use any documentation? Is it a document that's done because it has to be done? Yes. But having done it, how do you use it to inform decision making? And I think that's something that certainly has happened, but it needs to probably happen on an even greater basis going forward. Because it is when you start to look at a risk register, and we probably have to reflect on this as a council and as an Audit and Scrutiny Committee. Is it a risk or is it an issue? And it's two very separate things. If it's an issue, it's something you already know about and you're dealing with. If it's a risk, it's something you're almost horizon scanning to see what is coming over, what could materialise, and how are we ready to deal with that if it does materialise. And that's where I think as the risk register matures, and perhaps, with further support from industry experts, is how we use it to at times move from being issues, where that is decided to be the case, into that idea of risk. And if it matures to get to that level, then I think you use it even more to actually support decision making about how council may either spend money, how it will use its resource, and how it will use its time to mitigate against those potential risks that may or may not materialise. But where they do materialise, that you've got procedure or policy or actions in place which can ultimately save you a lot of money by being in a place to deal with it when it comes, if it comes to pass. So as I think about using the risk register and allowing it to mature through everyone's understanding and everyone's challenge of it, so that we are using it in as good a way as possible to help support decision making. We do that already, but I think we can become even better at it in terms of using documentation and using the learning and also what we are about to do is roll out that training to departments so that they can use it, because you see the corporate risk register here, but sitting below the corporate risk register
are departmental registers. And part of CMT's learning is that when we do look at the corporate risk register, we ask each department to bring forward the things that are giving them the greatest thanks, in other words, the things that are sitting at the top of their risk registers. So that gives an awareness to the corporate management team, not only of what's happening corporately, but what is happening across other departments across the council, to get an improved understanding of what do we need to support, what do we need to be aware of, and what do we need to know may happen, so that the right actions can be taken earlier to deal with those.
Okay, you would like to come back on that?
Yeah, not come back on it, but just a further question. Just for further information. So, is the suggestion here, you mentioned Zurich, is that our insurance people? So, is there something now in which the insurance companies are, I mean, quickly, you've mentioned here, all organisations have a risk register. Is it just a list that somebody makes up and then it's parked there? And maybe that's one of the frustrations that maybe the insurance company has. So, is this part of ongoing? Have they actually approached the council to say, look, I think you need some training here because we don't believe that the risk has been used, or is this just an actual part of the service that they are providing just to keep us updated?
Actually, the opposite. We approached them to ask them for support. They were delighted to do so. So much so that by completing the training and working with them, they actually reduce the premium. So it's in their benefit and their interests for organisations to have as strong and as robust a strategic risk register as they can, because obviously that allows you to try and forecast where things may or may not go wrong in the future, which helps them. So they will come back in free of charge and do training across all our directorate leadership teams to support everyone in understanding risk, and where they understand risk, to have even more robust plans in place to be able to put the control measures in place to mitigate against potential areas of challenge that may or may not occur in the future.
Okay, any further questions from anyone? No. We're happy to accept this report then. Agreed? Okay, thank you. Item 10 is back over to the external auditors. So this is the best value thematic report on workforce innovation, and it's Grace who's going to take this.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Committee. You may recall from last year that the Accounts Commission do set an annual topic for all council auditors to do a thematic review, really just to kind of pick up similar issues from across the sector, and then eventually they will produce a single report covering all 32 councils. So as you said earlier then, the topic for this year was workforce innovation, so probably there's lots of overlap with what we've already spoken about today. So because they do set the theme and they very much set the questions, so the review and the process that we went through really directly followed the questions and the methodology that were set by Audit Scotland, just to make sure there is that consistency across councils. But the aim of the report was really very much about looking for innovative practice and identifying any areas for improvement. So in terms of key messages, then I guess we do continue to see more and more alignment across all of this strategic planning framework, really. In particular, I guess the new people strategy and the digital strategy is really around about that learning organisation that the Chief Executive talked about earlier, and about some of the efficiency messages that we had earlier as well. And I think that throughout the review then, we thought there was really good oversight and understanding of workforce issues and workforce planning across the council, but we note within the first recommendation that there are key themes that aren't routinely considered by elected members. Annoyingly today there were 2 papers on the agenda that do cover workforce, just to prove me wrong. But I think we had that discussion around about the balance for workforce planning, around where it is operational or where it does tip into that kind of strategic overview. that would be of interest to elected members. So the report touches on some of the challenges that faced East Renfrewshire Council really as an employer, including capacity and skills gaps and recruitment challenges across some services in particular. And we also highlight some of the improvements that have been made, and I would include in that some of the service planning documentation, just to really get some of those those detailed bottom-up risks up to the OD board and to CMT. We made 2 recommendations relating to the employee survey itself. So one of the findings of the survey was that around about a quarter of employees don't consider that they have regular conversations for their goals and development. And so really that was around about promoting the quality conversations process across the council. And the other recommendation related to the survey itself, because in the last survey, then the response rate was really quite low. It was just over 1 in 4 of employees who actually responded to that survey. And so we were essentially saying we think that that is a really useful learning and an assurance mechanism. So really just to kind of up that uptake would be great. I guess the final thing I wanted to say was it was a kind of detailed, having to look at lots of questions, methodology, and so we did have a lot of support from Louise and from her team, so HR and from digital transformation. But also one of the council's trade union representatives did actually agree to be interviewed, and so he participated as well, which was really great for us to see, and so I would thank them all for their time.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, Grace. I don't have any questions on it. I simply wanted to reflect that I thought Exhibit 3 within your report on page 298, I think that's a really good kind of practical demonstration of some of the things that's available through the digital transformation agenda, because elected members hear these terminologies, but we're obviously not in the coalface to see what's actually happening on the ground, and particularly around the new management insight tools around absence, for example, which we've had quite a detailed conversation about this afternoon. So I think that was quite interesting to see. Are there any questions from members at all? Are we happy to accept this? Yeah, okay, moving on. Oh, sorry. Councillor Ireland.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just trying to find my point again. There was it was point 5 that was made. What progress has the council made with sharing roles or functions across its services and or with other councils and partners? I had a question around that because I know that collaboration has been mentioned several times from COSLA as something that we have to do an awful lot more of. So are there any plans to increase collaboration with other councils? Is this anything that's came up? But I wanted to make a comment on this same point, and that I was very, very pleased to read that it says a regional local government skills working group is working with the University of the West of Scotland to launch courses to respond to the shortening skills, and I think they're also addressing another couple of skills gaps as well. That was really good news to read that that's something that's moving forward. So I look forward to see if that plays out, goes on. But it was just to see, is there anything else that we can take up and actually work collaboratively with other councils on as we move forward?
Well, as soon as you said that, the hand from the Director of Business Operations and Partnerships went up, so we'll go over to Louise. Thank you.
So keen to answer. There's nothing concrete right now, Councillor Ireland. I wouldn't bring you in a specific example, but I think that that's been talked widely across the sector, really. We're all very conscious of budget challenges and you know what the future of public services need to look like. So there's a few different work streams that are being taken forward by the Improvement Service and Solace together, led by a cohort of chief executives. I think there's 6 or 7 work streams, and one of them is looking at statutory services and actually what the basis of statutory services might look like in the future and how services then might be delivered differently, and if there are opportunities in that. There are also opportunities around digital, and they're looking at digital shared services. So, for example, new developments around shared blue badge provision and a number of other services that might go together. A number of councils are working on them in pilots just now, and they might roll out further. and there's hope that across those different work streams there will be scope for further just different ways of delivering services, and some of that might involve sharing. So lots of food for thought there, I think.
No, that's really good to hear. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, we're happy to accept the report. Okay, thank you. Moving on, item 11 is the National External Audit Report. It's an update regarding Integration Joint Boards, Finance Performance 2024. Clark, I think you have an introductory piece to say.
It's just to say that under the committee specialisation arrangements, Councillor Edlin's leading on the review of this particular report. Leslie Bairden, Head of Finance and Resources from the HSEP, is here today and has provided comments on the local position, and they've already been considered by the Performance and Audit Committee of the Integration Joint Board and are appended to the report. So Leslie's here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Everyone's had the opportunity to read the report. It's been set out in full within the committee's papers. So I've simply skipped straight to questions. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask on this. I do have one which I would begin with. And thank you, Leslie, for sitting through one of the lengthiest committee meetings we've had for a while at Audit. It's on page 317, paragraph 10. You've simply responded to the point there that we've not seen significant evidence of the shift in the balance of care from hospitals to the community, which was intended with the creation of integration joint boards and greater partnership working between health and social care. It's a big question, but how can we move more closely towards that? Because IJBs are not a new thing, it's not a new concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose there are two parts to our thinking on this point. One, the world changed a little bit since the legislation was written, and now, so post-pandemic, certainly the demand for services in terms of community has significantly increased, but we're also seeing pressure on hospital beds. So I guess when the legislation was put in place, no one envisaged how the landscape on both health and social care would change. The aspiration around the move from hospital-based services to community, that was in place pre this legislation, but I suppose locally, since we've been in HSEP, we have seen some shift. The very specific example I can give is the release of some transfer from closure of long-stay beds locally in Mearnskirk and wider across the GGC cohort in terms of some of the older people ward closures. That did result in transfer coming into community services, and for us it allowed us to remodel some interim care beds, particularly in Bonneton House. We've also seen some bed closures from one of the hostage units that we are responsible for people with learning disabilities. So one of those very long stay units closed, and that resulted in resource transfer from hospital beds into community places as well. So I suppose the transfer is very much a longer term aspiration. It takes significant redesign in order to close a whole ward or to close a whole unit to then release funding. So there are a couple of examples of significant change, but we also have local examples of services that we've put in place and embedded in the community. So some phlebotomy services, some maternity services are now operating locally from our health and care centres, and some the intention is also looking at some of the outpatient clinics that traditionally would have been based in the larger hospitals are now moving into that community-based provision. I hope that answers your question.
It makes sense, and I think it kind of helps account for Eastwood Health Centre and being the size and scale it is, and the number of services that are offered there. Councillor Edlin, as the councillor leading on this report, is there any questions that you'd like to put into the mix in this?
I don't have any questions as such, but I have to say that sometimes since I've been elected, I feel that I'm managing decline. And I have to say, I'm very impressed with what we are doing in our own health and social care partnership. I think we're doing better than Scotland in general. But when you read through this report, this audit report, there's no doubt that there's an increased demand, and there's going to be, it's going to escalate because more people are coming into our area, more elderly people are coming in, they require more services, and you're facing a situation where we're continually searching for cost-cutting ways of doing things, and there's just not enough money to fund the service as, in my opinion, it should be. And the staff are being, more and more demands are being made of our very high-quality staff who are very, very dedicated, could not be more dedicated. But we have a situation, really, that we have to face the facts. If you don't fund the service properly, you can't provide the service. And it's hard to say this when you see people working so hard. But if you look at this report, it's pretty damning, and for the whole of Scotland, actually. But I would say that the only good thing about it is that here in East Renfrewshire, I think we're doing better than the whole of Scotland. But it doesn't help, and there has to be a way of getting more money into the system if we're going to meet the demands of the service in the future years.
Thank you, Councillor Redden. I suppose the final piece would be paragraph 12, again in page 317. Simply the statement that there's uncertainty around the direction of the plans for the National Care Service, which has been put forward by the Scottish Government. And that creates a difficult context for planning and delivering effective services, which is a direct quote. I suppose the question would be if we find it difficult with a more local dimension to achieve all of the efficiencies and improvements we hope to with IGBs, would the National Care Service potentially make that more difficult? Is that something that you're able to answer or comment upon at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose for our context locally, East Renfrewshire has been providing integrated services for a very long time, a very long-standing community health and care partnership ever before this iteration of the legislation. So I think in terms of those efficiencies, integrated working, and how the services are provided to the community, I think we are doing pretty well. The original proposals around the National Care Service, you could see that would have made quite a significant change, particularly across our workforce. If there had been a move to one employing body, one set of terms and conditions, potentially the direct funding discussions. At the moment, in terms of the legislation and proposals as they stand, it's clearly changed quite a bit since that very initial iteration. So it's difficult to see what difference it would make, good or bad at the moment, unless there was a significant change to the funding structure that came with it. I think the governance route to us is where the change would be in terms of the operational services on the ground. Governance would dictate whether that remained as integrated as it is at the moment, but hopefully nothing would change that would detract from how those services are operating for our communities just now.
I think that's a very helpful reflection. Thank you. Councillor Redland.
I'd just like to add that in this council we discussed the National Care Service, and we made a unanimous decision about that. The letter was written by the convener at the time, I believe. So we as a council of record, we have made it known what our position is regarding the National Care Service, proposed National Care Service.
Okay, thank you. With all of that being said, everyone who wished to speak has spoken. Can we accept the report and move on? Okay, yes, thank you. Item 12, second last item on the agenda, is the Internal Audit Annual Report for 23-24, and I'd like to invite Michelle Blair, Chief Auditor, to speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
One of the functions of internal audit is to provide an assurance statement to the Council on governance, risk management and internal controls. This duty is formalised in financial regulations, as is the requirement to produce an annual report, which reports on the activities of the section during the year. 23-24 was again a challenging year for internal audit for a number of reasons, and some items in the original plan had to be deleted, as marked in Appendix C. I would add that most of these are now being covered in the current year 24-25. As in previous years, priority was given to completing audits that would give most assurance for the assurance statement that internal controls were operating satisfactorily. 23-24 original plan, we had 594 direct audit days, but only actually achieved 375, which was about 63%. Despite this, we produced 18 reports, and we've now got satisfactory responses for all of these. Throughout the year, detail has been provided in the quarterly progress reports to Audit Committee of high and medium risk recommendations, and also where recommendations were not accepted. In addition, some reports were circulated in full, such as City Deal and the William Wood School audit, plus all follow-up audits are routinely circulated to Audit Committee members. There was only 2 recommendations not accepted by management, and these have been highlighted to Audit Committee during the year and fully discussed. Contingency, we didn't actually use much contingency during 23-24, it was only about 13 days, covering 2 areas. Work in both of these have now been concluded, and I would add it's a difficult area to budget for, and we've already exceeded 13 days in the current 24-25 year. Seems to kind of fluctuate every alternate year. In terms of public sector internal audit standards, we do comply with the standards, and this is specifically noted in section 5. The external assessment, which needs to be done every 5 years, was carried out and reported to committee in January of this year. The resulting quality assurance improvement plan from this review is included in Appendix D, and 2 of the 6 actions have still to be implemented, but I propose to work on these over the next few months. The performance indicators are in Appendix B, and there's a summary of all the indicators, along with some reasons for why we didn't meet all of the targets. In conclusion, I would say that there's been clear management commitment to work with Audit to improve existing procedures, and this will be monitored through our follow-up programme. The annual assurance statement is in Appendix A, and it basically concludes that reasonable assurance can be placed in the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's framework of governance, risk management and internal control. So, subject to any questions, I would ask that you note the contents of the annual report, approve the annual assurance statement and submit it to Council. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Now, the committee has been asked to note the annual statement of assurance and the contents of this annual report. I'll be happy to do so, or does anyone have any pressing questions on it? Councillor Wallace.
Yeah, there's been quite a significant turnover of very senior management staff in the organisation. And just curious to know, with the new staff that have come into place, are they receptive to any investigations that you're having, and are you getting all the assistance you need in order to get the things sorted out, if you like?
I would say yes, management are very receptive to looking at areas. So yeah, no problems.
And just one last thing, if I may, in terms of staffing, you're the department up to speed again and continue to be so, yes?
Happy to report fully staffed, and I was very lucky that I got 2 internal people who are very well qualified and know the council really well, albeit not in audit, but they've got a lot of council experience.
And with that, everyone's satisfied? Accept the report? Yes. Thank you. Coming back to Michelle again for the review of the internal audit charter.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is kind of linked to the public sector internal audit standards and the quality assurance improvement programme. The assessment that was carried out by South Lanarkshire recommended that the charter was updated to include a mission statement and a definition of assurance services to the council and also to external parties. So although this charter looked quite different to previous versions, the content is primarily the same, apart from the few extra bits that I've added, and I've listed specifically where to find these in paragraph 2.3.
I'm now hoping that the Charter now contains all the areas that the committee would expect to be included, but if you think I'm missing anything, let me know. Subject to any questions, I would ask you to approve the Audit Charter. Thank you.
Do committee members believe anything has to be edited or added to the Charter, or are we happy to accept it as is? Councillor Wallace.
Just to say, I think we all feel the great benefit of having a mission statement.
Okay, I'm sure the Chief Auditor's very happy with that feedback, so thank you. Okay, happy to accept this then? Yes, okay, with the agreement of that, that brings us to the end of this afternoon's meeting. If I can just relay one message, there's an email going out from the Democratic Services Manager to say that obviously full council was scheduled to sit at 4 o'clock, it's now 4:05. That will now begin at 4:30 because there has to be a break for testing of the public eye system. Okay.
Just one last thing. I know you mentioned it at the beginning of this, but just to say farewell to Ms McCrossan and for all your help over many, many years. I'm sure more than you wish to count.
I believe I'm still here for the full council.
Happy retirement.
Here at 4:30.
Yeah, so we're keeping her back actually. Okay, thank you for your attendance.